Good morning.
Hello. I was talking with Rocio, and I was waiting for the rest of your classmates to arrive. But meanwhile, we can review some of these photographs, which is essentially the um, spirit of this literary period, which is depict reality as it is, right? Without trying to disguise the real events or facts like a war and presenting it as close to reality as possible. Just like when we are looking at a picture and we're looking at the details, observing exactly what happened through a glimpse of the particular reality. That's what, in general, realistic art pretended to do, not just in the literary realm, but also in other forms of art, like paintings as well. So the devastating consequences of these experiences shape somehow the way people behave, the way people think, right? And sometimes, um, if you're in, if you're really into realistic compositions or works, um, you like to see reality as it is. You don't want to be a depiction that is not really close to what really is. If you think the purpose of literature is to portray reality and not to open a door for your imagination to go away from reality, right? This is a type of literature that you really want. So we had a Rose Family previously, and Huckleberry Finn. We're penning with some questions about Huckleberry Finn. I think I posted this presentation. This presentation in the LMS included these questions, which are applicable to any type of literary work. For example, what demands does the story make on its readers? What does the story assume or understand about its readers? How might one describe the ideal audience for a story? Sometimes, or in general, stories suppose or authors assume, right? Writers assume certain background knowledge about a specific topic. Sometimes that makes or explains some decisions that the authors make not be very explicit about something because they assume that the readers know, or be very explicit and give lots of detail about one narration, assuming that not every single reader might be familiar with that particular reality. Okay, so these questions can be applied to any book. For example, the last one, what is the intention of the story? What is the main idea? What is it trying to tell us? What is the narrator or the author trying to tell us? Is she or he trying to teach us a lesson? Is he or she trying to portray the long voyage or this personal growth that a character has, like in some works called Bildungsroman, in which the main character is going from a very early age towards teenage years or becoming an adult, and we see this process of becoming more mature, right? So, what's the intention? What's the main idea there? Okay, so these questions are applicable to any. For example, the setting, for example, the narrator, as we can see here, the type of narrator, the use of language, right? The stylistic or writing style, if the author uses complex sentences or short and simple sentences, and what's the purpose of it, right? Sometimes complex or short sentences have to do with the way characters speak, right? These are some of the questions that were posted in the LMS for number 4. These are the ones for Emily that were posted in the chat the other day. And these are the ones about Huckleberry Finn, the very last book report, right? Good morning, Carla, Carlos, Maria Paz, Mauricio, Natalia.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
So the last group was giving a book report on Huckleberry Finn, right? And
yes.
Okay, good. So Belen.
Yes.
Belen, if you see the questions, they are numbered. Can you choose a number and decide who will answer that particular question?
I decide. Okay. Question number 4.
Good. Who do you want that question to be answered? Which student is going to answer the question?
It can be anyone, even Rocio. Can I choose Rocio?
Sure, you're the one choosing. Yes, absolutely.
Then Rocio.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Belen. Well, in Huckleberry Finn, the concepts of good and evil are portrayed in in different ways. For example, the caretakers of Huck, even though they're religious, they both, Widow Douglas and Miss Watson, represent good and evil in a certain manner, because Widow Douglas would teach Huck good things, would be really gentle and really nice to him, whereas Miss Watson would be like representing a really strict and punishing God, and she would be really focused on punishing and being very strict. And in that way, I think religion in the story showed a very two faces, in which religion would hope to change people, make everyone better under the eyes of God. But on the other hand, religion would support and would help slavery and many other very evil things, like this rivalry and fight, which ended up with the Ranger Forts all murdered. And in that way, I think that good and evil are treated like a two-faced coin, because people for society may show like they're good, but in reality, with their slaves, they would be really violent and cruel. So I think that what this book is trying to teach us is that we do not have to follow religion or the law in order to be good. We need to ask ourselves if we are doing is good with our conscience. If, for example, the law or religious tells us that, for example, having a slave, treating him badly, being violent towards him or her, and doing bad things, we do not have to accept it. We need to question that and find out what is really good and what is really wrong. So I think in that way, this story helps us realize that we have an inner conscious, and we need to be able to differentiate what is good and what is wrong. And I think that's what Huckleberry Finn, or the role that Huckleberry Finn has in this story, from my point of view. I think that good and evil are very implicit and hidden within this story, and the story obviously portrays the reality at that time, because this is in the naturalistic and realistic period. So this is a criticism, and I think this criticism is towards this double morality that people had, which they thought they were good people because of they were religious and had good manners and were civilized, but indeed they were really bad people and had really bad intentions and made really bad things. I don't know if someone wants to add something about this.
Thank you so much, Rocio. I like the concept of double morality or double-faced morality, which is part of not only this period, but it's also something that we see nowadays. Sometimes we meet people that behaves in one way, or um, his or her speech goes in one direction, and his acts go in a different direction. So double morality in terms of slavery owning, or the ones who held slaves. It's complex because if we go back in time in a time machine, people depended on slavery, and I guess it would be quite scary for them not to be able to use
Creo que no le podemos escuchar, profe. Algo pasó. ¿Te sale, profe? Parece, ¿no?
Es que por la,
Sí, salió.
lluvia,
Se salió,
por la lluvia están todas las conexiones de internet pegadas. Yo estoy sin luz y estoy con el internet del teléfono,
se le había caído el internet.
probablemente.
Yo creo.
Oye, ¿hoy día vamos a presentar o no?
Parece que había de una presentación, ¿o no?
Sí, creo que
Sí,
tocaba
pues,
Sister Carrie y vamos a tener la discusión de Huckleberry Finn.
¿Ya?
Sí, o sea, quedó pendiente la discusión de Huckleberry Finn, que es la que estamos haciendo ahora.
Ujú.
El profesor está silenciado.
A lo mejor la conexión está mal.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I had to, the laptop is still frozen, and I had to enter through the cell phone. That's why it took me a while to get back. So I don't see Daniela in the room. I don't know if she is here.
She has clashes with another subject at this time.
Oh.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I'm
Right
in
then.
representation of my group. If you want
Okay,
to ask me something.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you elaborated a very clear, crystal clear and a very deep answer about the how good and evil were treated in this work. So I'm very happy about that. All right. I don't know if, if the rest of you, if the rest of you has any questions. If not, we could move to the following book report, which might be an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge or Sister Carrie. I'm really, well, I'm expecting the decision of this. Which is it going to be?
Professor?
Sister Carrie, I think.
Okay.
Professor,
Alrighty.
I just wanted to mention a little thing.
Yes,
that,
of course.
can I? Very short.
Yeah, of course. Go on.
Is that with Daniela, we prepare a discussion about this racist subject, but I just wanted to mention that this Mississippi River and these southern states are really, until nowadays really attached to the concept of racism and this very awful perspective of people of color. And actually this George Floyd murder was in Mississippi State, so it was in the same place, and that means that all this discussion and all what this book really talks about, racism and everything, even though it was written years and years ago, is still a problem. It's still a criticism for society. So we just wanted with Daniela that you had in mind this, that Jim, which was the Afro-American slave, wanted to go to Cairo, which was a city in the north where slaves could be free, and Huck helped him towards that goal. And the Mississippi State and all the surroundings are in the southern part of the United States are still very racist and are still very attached to this concept of this discrimination towards people of color or Afro-American people. And I think that this is, if you read this, it could also apply in today's problematic of racism and discrimination. So I think it's very important for us to have this reflection that years have passed and not many things have changed in those states actually. And I think Jim's story was very cruel, was very difficult and really violent, and George Floyd suffered the same, and many people of color are suffering the same. Even though we are supposed to be free now, these people are still being discriminated and harassed and really living with fear. So I think we should be hugged. That's what I'm saying. We should be hugging this society, and we should go always, be supportive of people of color and abolish racism in all its forms, not only the legal forms, but also the social rules that we have been setting towards or throughout time. So that was our discussion as well about this racist topic. I don't know if you relate to that nowadays.
Absolutely, absolutely. I unfortunately also witnessed this racism, which is still present, even though slavery was formally abolished, but it's still part of the social problems that many countries, particularly United States, is still facing. They have not solved this, and that is something to consider, as you said. And also, I mean, there are many layers to this book. Racism is a very and probably the most important one. Also, if you paid attention to the writing style, Sawyer uses slangs, uses the language.
Yes, the N word, which
Mhm.
was really strong discriminating for people of color. And that's actually a criticism for Mark Twain, because they thought that Mark Twain was kind of racist, or he used this word in order to discriminate people. But in my opinion, I think he actually just tried to use the most realistic terms and what was actually happening, because you cannot cover the N word, for example, and some other uh, really racist and discriminatory terms, because you are I think the Mark Twain's aim was to show reality how it is, like raw, and therefore uh, generate these feelings in the readers. Sorry.
That's right. So the use of language is something that we should not we should take into consideration quite carefully, because it adds towards the story, right? It's very descriptive. Is not only the use of words, but only the way he uses the words. Exactly. So, I'm sorry, Daniel is not here, but we need to move on.
Yes.
So if Sister Carrie is ready, I mean, if the students who are giving this report are ready, you're welcome
Yes,
to
we are
share
ready.
your screen. All right. So take over the lessons, sorry, and you become the teachers, right?
Sí, profesor. Carla, can you share the screen, please?
Yes, doing it. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Yes.
No.
Now?
Yeah. Nice.
Okay.
Okay. Can I start now? Okay.
Anytime you
Good
want.
Can you hear me?
Very good, loud and clear.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone, professor, classmates. Today we're going to present our book report about the novel Sister Carrie by the author Theodore Dreiser. Our group is composed by Carla Estuardo, Alejandro Fuentes, and who is presenting now, Natalia Correa. To start our presentation, I'm going to contextualize about the period in which this novel was developed. So, when the Americans discovered the harshness of the frontier life and the Civil War, it shook the nation. For the nearly 50 years prior to these harsh events, Americans had looked at the world through the optimistic filters of Romanticism and Transcendentalism. But between 1870 and 1910, there were two main movements that took place in American literature: realism and naturalism. Realism was a reaction to the Civil War and the frontier line. Some characteristics of realism include that it was a critique of the romantic idea. It is focused on ordinary characters, everyday life situation, and realist stories that were written and told by simple people, common people. Additionally, it pays close attention to controversy over race, women, and class, which are the main topics of the novels of the period. Naturalism was a branch of realism. As for realism, it depicts real people in real situations. But naturalists also believed in forces larger than the individuals, like nature, fate, and heredity. Naturalists believe that these forces shaped individuals and their destiny. Also, naturalists often included themes of survival, determinism, and violence. Besides, writers often focused on the characters' unique characteristic. Though they differ slightly, naturalism and realism both depict the life and experiences of the common American man. This movement helped Americans cope with the realization that their lives would not always be as optimistic as the Romantics believed it would be. A little bit of the historical background for this period consists of the Civil War. In 1871, there was a secession in the Union from South Carolina. Eventually, the division among nations led to the Civil War. This war was fought due to the controversy over states' rights and slavery. This obviously put a damper on the States and affected the literary writings of this time period to be practical. After the war was fought, reconstructions took place. The United States began westward expansion through the Homestead Acts and the Indian reservations were now being overtaken in order for the nation to expand their borders. This expansion helped the country grow and eventually led to the Second Industrial Revolution, where electricity, telephones, and automobiles were put into play. The Second Industrial Revolution resulted in the expansion of cities, where then led to immigration. Now I'm going to mention some facts of the transformation of the nation. The first one is the Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1879, and facilitated the travel across the United States and contributed to the closing of the frontier. In early California, the railroads employed thousands of Chinese immigrants to do the toughest work. With the close of the frontier came an increasing nostalgia for the romance of the Wild West. Also, dime novels, as in the one in the right side, um, packed this nostalgia for urban readers. The United States, eager to compete with European nations, attempt to expand its influence beyond its continental borders, looking to gain the former Spanish possession of Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. In terms of immigration and population, as I mentioned before, there was a rapid population growth from 38.5 million people in 1870 to 123 million people by the end of 1920. Most of the population growth was from Europeans. Additionally, rural population declines as the urban population increased. Finally, the industrialization gained force in America. The amount of capital invested in manufacturing increased 4 times between 1850 and 1880. Monopolies allow a small number of men to control profitable enterprises. And also immigrants and obviously their children provide the labor force in that industrial era. Go ahead, Carla, please. Thank you. Now I'm going to talk about the author of this novel, that it was Theodore Dreiser. He was born to a large, poor German family in the American Midwest. His father was a mill worker who struggled to find employment in a strict adherent and was a strict adherent to the Roman Catholicism. This led Dreiser to associate his father's lack of productivity with religions. In this period, Dreiser also developed a profound desire for material wealth, something that would serve as inspiration for his literary works. After studying for a year in the Indiana University, Dresser became a reporter and moved to the East Coast. During these young adult years, he read T.H. Huxley, John Tyndall, and Herbert Spencer, and came to adopt a naturalistic worldview. Humans are helpless and wholly subjects of influence of the environment. Dresser married Sarah White in 1898, but his extramarital affairs led them to permanently separate some 40 years later. Theodore began to write Sister Carrie in 1899, and Doubleday published the book. However, the company was hesitant to do so, uncomfortable with the fact that the novel's main character, which is Carrie, is never punished for her immorality. I think it's a rude word, and thus decide to limit advertising for the novel. Consequently, Sister Carrie sold fewer than 500 copies when it first came out. Dresser's lack of success with the book and his marital troubles led him into a deep depression. But fortunately, his brother Paul Dresser arranged for Dresser's treatment in a sanitarium. After his recovery, Dresser became a successful editor for women's magazines, but was forced to resign after a scandal with his assistant's daughter. After some time, Dresser returned to writing fiction and enjoyed some success until the Great Depression. Unable to write well towards the end of his life, he moved to Hollywood in 1939 and supported himself by the sales of film rights of his early works. He died on December 28th in 1945 at the age of 74. Go ahead, Carla, please.
Okay. The summary of the story. Sister Carrie narrates the ascent and downfall of Carolina Carrie Neighbor, a young woman who moves from provincial Wisconsin to the big city. At the beginning of the novel, Carrie is penniless. She takes a train from her hometown of Columbia City, Wisconsin, to Chicago in the hopes of finding work in the city. She's going to live with her sister Minnie and her brother-in-law Hans. On the train, Carrie meets a friendly, provocative, and well-dressed traveling salesman named Druid. The two make tentative plans to meet later. However, after arriving in Chicago and seeing her sister's shabby apartment, Carrie feels ashamed that Druid should see her in such a place and writes to him telling him not to visit. Shortly after moving in, Hanson makes it evident that he expects Carrie to pay rent. Consequently, Carrie spends her first few days in Chicago looking for work in the wholesale district. As she wanders around, she becomes fascinated with the merchandise in the department stores and the well-dressed women who scarcely they need to look at her. Carrie struggles to find a business that will hire her as she has no experience, but eventually lands a position as a manual laborer in a wholesale shoe house. Although she's initially elated at having a position, she feels tired and the low pay ultimately leaves Carrie disillusioned. During the winter, Carrie falls sick and her prolonged absence causes her to lose her job. After recovering, Carrie begins another job search, but her spirits are dampened and her thoughts of not being able to pay rent and being forced to return to Wisconsin leave her in desperation. After several days of inefficient searching, Carrie encounters Druid. Friendly as ever, the salesman treats her to a bountiful meal and offers her $20 to buy new clothes. Carrie initially attempts to return the money, but Druid only proceeds to buy her a collection of fashionable clothes. Druid, moved by Carrie's prettiness and poor estate, offers to financially support her. After some mental tribulation, Carrie decides to become Druid's mistress. She leaves Minnie a simple note and moves into the house that Druid has rented for her. Druid continues to show Carrie the various pleasures of the city. However, over time, Carrie begins to notice his faults. Even though he remains friendly, Druid is unwilling to the idea of marriage, always putting it off to some later day, and also he lacks sensitivity. Around this time, Carrie makes the acquaintance of Mrs. Hale, a neighbor who takes Carrie out driving in richer districts and speaks highly to her of the upper levels of society, leading Carrie to desire more material wealth than Druid can provide. Around this time, Druid introduces Carrie to Harsgood, his friend and the manager of a popular high-end saloon. Carrie finds the sensitive Harsgood a much more agreeable companion than Druid. Undiscovered to Carrie, Harsgood is in the midst of experiencing some private family tensions. His wife and children are vain and uncaring, and he no longer feels like the true head of his household. Because of this, Harsgood feels immediately drawn to Carrie's youthful innocence and beauty. Shortly after some persuading from Harsgood, Carrie and the manager begin an affair behind Druid's back. And after the affair begins, Druid finds Carrie being part in a play, which is put on by the club in which he and Harsgood attend. On the evening of the show, Carrie puts on a spectacular performance that moves both of her lovers. Druid decides to marry Carrie, and Harsgood decides to steal her away from Druid. Okay, Alejandro, go ahead.
Okay, and can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, please mute your microphones so there's no echo. Thank you. Okay. The following day, Jowett learns from the chambermaid that Hertzwood has been visiting Carrie often, and that the pair are having an affair. So Jowett informs Carrie that Hertzwood is a married man. Then Carrie writes to Hertzwood in an attempt to cut ties with him. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hertzwood learns from acquaintances that her husband has been driving around with another woman and threatens him with a divorce lawsuit. Then Hertzwood started to nervously drinking at his saloon, and while he was closing that night, Hertzwood discovers that the safe, which was loaded with money, is unlocked. While he was drunk, Hertzwood decided to steal the money in the safe and then trick Carrie to leave town with him on a train by lying that Jowett has been injured in a faraway place. After finding out that Hertzwood's deception, Carrie gets mad but eventually complies under the influence of her lover's passionate pleas and promise of marriage. Hertzwood, hunted by the police and his own guilt, returns the majority of the money that he stole, though he still keeps a small amount of money for himself. The couple settled in New York. The couple set in New York as George and Carrie Wheeler. At first, Carrie enjoys her new life, and Hertzwood finds a job at a common saloon and supports her on a modest yet sufficient salary. However, Carrie soon becomes friends with a neighbor, Mrs. Vance, and realizes that her situation is pales in comparison to the lavish lifestyle that her new friend has. After a while, Hertzwood's business fails and he loses his job. He asks Carrie to live in a more cheap way. One night, Mr. Vance and his wife treat Carrie to a particularly luxurious dinner in a spectacular restaurant. There, Carrie meets Ames, Mrs. Vane's cousin, who suggests to her that wealth is not everything. Rather, it is better to pursue art. Carrie finds Ames wiser and more admirable than Jowett and Hertzwood, and is eager to gain his approval. To Carrie's dismay, Mrs. Vance soon moves away, along with his cousin, and Carrie is left to endure a dull, lonely life with Hertzwood. Although initially eager to find another job, the aged Hertzwood soon loses motivation and simply sits at home reading the newspaper. The money that he stole from the saloon in Chicago runs out, and Hertzwood asks Carrie to find a job, soothing her by saying that it would only be temporary and he would soon have another business venture. Remembering Ames's admiration for art, Carrie turns to the theater and finds a job as a chorus girl, though the work is far less glamorous than she expected. Luckily, her talent allows her to quickly move up the ranks, and soon she secures a decent position within the company. Carrie meets and becomes friends with a fellow chorus girl, Lola, who asks if Carrie would be willing to move into an apartment with her as roommates. Feeling dissatisfied with Hertzwood, idleness and bound by household duties, Carrie decides to leave him and accept Lola's offer. She leaves Hertzwood a brief note and $20 in it. Now devoting herself entirely to work, Carrie soon gains recognition and before long becomes one of the company's stars. Soon she gets paid more than she can spend and more than can she spend, and her picture appears in papers throughout New York City. Carrie eventually moves into a luxurious hotel as a patron, bringing Lola with her, and receives many notes from various fans, though she is not interested in any of them. Meanwhile, a rejected and deeply impoverished Hertzwood takes to the streets, wandering and begging, and without Carrie to know, eventually he commits suicide in a 15-cent boarding house. Finally, Mrs. Vance, Ames, and Jowett come to visit Carrie, and though Jowett tries to win Carrie over again, she rejects his advances. The novel closes with a widely rich and famous Carrie contemplating life, disillusioned and unhappy. The end.
Okay, now we are moving into the characters. There are a lot of characters, so we're going to start now. The first character is Carrie Meaver, or Caroline Meaver, the protagonist of this novel. She travels to Chicago to stay with her sister and her brother-in-law, and this cosmopolitan consumer world of Chicago fascinates her, and she constantly wants to buy things. Her first job is a low-paid, arduous position in a factory. When she loses her job, her sister and brother-in-law cannot support her, so she becomes Charles Drowart's mistress. Afterwards, she falls in love with another man, George Hurstgood. Carrie and Hurstgood run to New York, where they discover that married life is far less exciting than their affair. Carrie leaves Hurstgood because he fails to provide her with the luxury life she wants. Finally, she becomes a famous high-paid actress in New York. The second character is Charlie Dredd, who is a charming, flashy salesman with a strong appetite for romance. Although he is warm-hearted, he never takes any of his romance affairs seriously. But he provides Carrie with a place to stay after she forced to stop living with her sister Minnie. He also promises to marry her, but he never really intends on following through. He loses Carrie to Horsewood, and then years later, after she has become a famous actress, tries unsuccessfully to win her back. The third character is George Horsewood, who is the manager of Fitzgerald and Moyes, which is a saloon in the city of Chicago. At the beginning of the novel, he's a wealthy and important man, but he falls in love with Carrie after meeting her through Druid. He tells Carrie that he loves her, but he fails to mention that he's American. After his wife discovers his affair with Carrie and files for divorce, he steals $10,000 from the saloon First Gerard and Moise and flees with Carrie to Montreal. There, he marries her before his divorce with Julia is complete, although he keeps his theft a secret from Carrie. He is discovered by an investigator and required to return most of the money in order to protect his reputation. In New York, Hurstwood slowly descends into apathy and poverty. After Carrie leaves him, he becomes a homeless beggar and eventually commits suicide. Go ahead. The following slide, please. Thank you. Hanson and Minnie are the most closer relatives of Carrie. Hanson and his wife Minnie are Carrie's first hosts in Chicago. Hanson is a quiet, stern man who disapproves of Carrie's whimsical nature. Minnie is Carrie's old sister. She and her husband Hanson believe in hard work and frugal spending, mostly because they are too poor to do otherwise. Mrs. Vance is, for a time, Carrie's neighborhood in New York. She and Carrie become friends, and Carrie notices that she is a wealthy, well-kept wife. She is the catalyst for Carrie's dissatisfaction with Hurstwood's modest income. The following character is Mr. Ames, who is a New Yorker and cousin of the Vances. Carrie becomes infatuated with him. Also, she thinks of him as a scholar of sorts, and he represents for her the artistic taste she wishes to acquire. The following character is Julia Hurstwood, who is Hurstwood's first wife. She is a vindictive and extremely jealous, and she files for divorce after discovering Hurstwood fall in love with Carrie. Go ahead, Alejandro.
Okay, so we have some minor characters, but nevertheless they were important in the story. First, we have George and Jessica Hurstwood, which are the sons of the Hurstwoods. First, the son he works for a real estate firm, and after the divorce lawsuit, he doesn't want to do anything with his father. Jessica Hurstwood is a vain girl, and she hopes to enter the social elite circles by marrying a rich man. Then we have Fitzgerald and Moy, um, and like Natalia said, they were the owners of the saloon in Chicago with the same name, and they work with Hurstwood. And after Hurstwood stole the money from the safe, they didn't present charges against him. Then we have Mr. and Mrs. Hale. This couple were neighbors, were one of the first neighbors that Carrie had. Mr. Hale was the theater manager, and Mrs. Hale was one of the first friends that Carrie had, and she was the person in charge of giving Carrie all the gossips in about the theater scene. and she was the responsible for Carrie's fascination with the theater and all the wealth associated with it. And finally, we have Lola, who is the chorus girl that befriends Carrie in New York. And then they became roommates when they started to live together towards the end of the book. And next slide, please. Ah, the captain. I didn't see it because of the bar in the thing. Okay, finally we have the captain, who is a homeless man who lives in New York. Um, and like and every day other homeless men gather around him, and he asks passing pedestrians to donate the price for a bed, the price for a bed for the night for each of the men, uh, for each of the homeless men around him. And he persists in his effort until every man has a place to sleep. Now, let's continue.
Okay, the setting and the historical setting. Sister Carrie features two different urban settings. At the beginning of the plot, the reader is introduced to the city of Chicago in the year 1889 and 1890. Later on, the storyline proceeds in New York from 1890 to 1897. Both locations had been the largest cities of the United States at that particular time. When speaking of city in American literature, Sister Carrie is important to deal with because Dresser depicts real American cities. Through the consciousness and the eyes of Carrie Meaver, the reader sees the real city as she imagines it to be. In the novel, Carrie always draws her own picture of Chicago, the imaginary city in this case, which is only an illusion of the real Chicago of the 19th century. However, the real and the imaginary meet when she soon realizes that she is going to live in a small apartment together with her sister having a low-paid job. The clash between the imaginary and the reality causes Carrie's materialistic behavior later on in the text. In this regard, the streets of Chicago in Sister Carrie function as a medium of display of material things and status. Since such a parade of classes is happening inside the city itself, one can state that the city is represented as an entity which can create or change people's attitudes, and additionally encourages the development of materialistic and capitalistic identity. So the city becomes a place of commerce and also consumption. To add more, Dresser published Sister Carrie in 1900, a time when America was expanding rapidly. Cities were growing and railroad systems were allowing the people to travel from coast to coast with relative ease. With this uptick in growth and mobility, people try harder than even before to move up the social ladder and fulfill the American dream. And that dream finally seems accessible. Readers can see this mobility in Sister Carrie. Carrie starts out as a poor girl from a rural town and becomes a wealthy and popular actress that tours the world. At the turn of the century, social classes and the stratification of rich and poor were changing dramatically with the advent of new technological advancements and shifting social awareness. However, the late 1800 and early 1900 began with their fair share of problems too. Even though the rights for worker and better working conditions were slowly changing to catch up with the economic prosperity of industrialization, labor conditions for the working class were notoriously bad.
Okay. For the narrator, we have that is a third-person omniscient type of narrator, and one particular feature that this narrator possesses is that it has some sort of philosophical reflection. Um, that means that every time that a moral act or a decision that Carrie has in the book the narrator tries to depict a moral lesson towards the reader. We are not sure if the author would be the same as the narrator. Probably the narrator try, sorry, the author tried to make a narrator more philosophical, or maybe he's trying to portray his own, or maybe the author is trying to portray his own philosophical lesson towards its reader. But either way, it is an interesting approach to what is happening during the book. Next.
Okay, the tone. The tone of this book is gloomy and also reflective. Sister Carrie is the perfect book to curl up with on a rainy and colorless day. The gloomy tone is presented throughout the book as the narrator never fails to point out the darker aspects of life, which reinforces and adds another layer of sadness to the already dark situation depicted in the novel. As Carrie grows more successful in the world's eyes, it is as if we are not supposed to be completely comfortable with that transition, and the somber tone serves as a constant reminder of that. Besides that, the narrator frequently treats us to little philosophy lectures. This reflective tone really gets us in the mood to think about the significance of the more everyday character actions. Like, for example, when Harsgood reads the newspaper for the gazillionth time.
Okay, so for the symbols we have three: the rocking chair, the newspaper, and clothing. The rocking chair is a symbol of um, of motion, but not go, but no making further progress. So, in the case of Carrie and Horsewood, when they are in a rocking chair, they find comfort, especially Carrie, and that is soothing for her. But that is a symbol for Carrie's emotional and psychological state, in which she wants to go forward, but always she always stayed in the same place at the end, and that can be seen at the end of the book, where even though she gained some wealth, she wasn't happy as she expected. So there was the illusion of progress, but in the end she stayed in the same place. Then we have the paper, the newspaper. This is a symbol of a passive approach of life, in the sense that after the robber, after Hertzwood stole the money from the safe, it was he and he stayed in New York, and he started to look at the newspaper, reading at the theory that he made, and from that point on, he started to read the newspaper constantly, because the newspaper presented stories from the past. So that was the passive approach of life, just staying there and reading about the past, and like the rocking chair, making no progress, or staying in the same place that you are. And finally, we have clothing, and this is the most obvious one, but it's still important, that clothing symbolizes the importance of physical appearance and, of course, wealth. And that was the main aspect that Carrie was pursuing. So that is the symbolism behind the clothing. Next.
The themes. The main theme in this book is the American dream. The central theme of Sister Carrie is the effect of the misguided and misdirected American dream of success. Each of Dresser's characters in Sister Carrie search for their own American dreams, the ones offered by a growing and prosperous democratic country. Carrie, a poor country girl, arrives in Chicago filled with the expectation of acquiring the finer things in life. She imagines the elegant clothes she will wear, the exciting places to which she will go, and the fashionable people with whom she will associate, thinking that everyone who lives beyond the boundaries of her Midwestern state has achieved that higher status. Money, clothes, and success fail to provide the happiness that they promised, but the darkest part of Carrie's tragedy is that she fails to understand this completely. On the other hand, Druid seeks his own version of the American dream. He has achieved a certain station in life and wears the clothes to prove it. He frequents the important establishments in town and has befriended many of the right people. But he pursues the other appointments that represent his dreams, such as a beautiful woman to adorn his arm and his own home. Besides that, this theme is also presented in the character of Harsgood, who has the woman, the established home and a family, and also a good position. But he wants more. He knows that his employers leave him out of important decisions making, and he knows his friends like him for his position. So he seeks love, appreciation, and more prestige. From the main theme, we can take other themes that can be also portrayed in the book. The first one is ambition. Carrie has lots of related ambitions in Sister Carrie: to get rich, to get really rich, to be a famous actress, to be a really famous actress. So for Carrie, there is always some other goals to reach that is going to be the thing that brings her perfect happiness. But instead, this kind of thinking becomes the perfect recipe for unhappiness. As readers, it is easy to come away from this book wondering if having ambitions is really as good as it looks like. The next one is wealth. Money is magic in the world of Sister Carrie, especially for Carrie herself. Her love affair with money is more passionate than any of her relationships with the novel's men. While we see plenty evidence of wealth in the novel, I mean fancy clothes and big mansions, what is even more apparent is Carrie's desire to be rich. And Carrie isn't the only one. The rest of the characters have the desire to become wealthy or to maintain wealth, often leads straight to trouble. The next theme is society and class. In Sister Carrie, we meet characters who have loads of cash, others who are flat broke, and some who are everywhere in between. Characters in this novel hardly exist outside their class distinctions. How they are viewed by other characters and how they are viewed by themselves has a whole lot to do with how big their house is, or what brand of shoes they are wearing. Of course, these class distinctions are not set in stone. Each of the central characters' narratives are in fact based on their movements among a broad spectrum of social class categories, including very rich, middle class, lower middle class, and poor. The next theme is marriage. This is an important theme because the marriage in the late 19th century looks different from the marriage in the novel. The traditional gender role expectations is represented by men generally expected to bring home the bacon and women generally expected to cook it up. But in the book, there are very interesting reversal of those expectations. The next theme is isolation and loneliness. Carrie might otherwise have had the perfect happy ending if not for one thing: loneliness. By the end of the novel, despite becoming a big success and attracted tons of admirers, Carrie feels disconnected from everyone around her. In fact, as we close the book, we are left with that image of Carrie rocking on her chair completely alone. But Carrie is not the only one who suffers from feeling of exclusion and isolation. Harsgood is lonely practically from the moment we meet him, and his situation in this regard only gets worse. So Sister Carrie just goes to show that you can be surrounded by all your friends in a very interesting city and still feel totally alone. Morality and ethics. Throughout the story, we can notice that this theme is presented while the readers are making themselves some questions, such as should Gary leave Druid for Harsgood? Should Harsgood take the money and run? And besides that, Gary makes some decisions to survive in the new cities, decisions that cannot be morally correct, but in order to get enough success, she has to make them. Such a phenomenon is referred to as social Darwinism, the idea that certain people become powerful in society because they are innately better. This theory applies biological concepts of natural selection and survival of the fittest to sociology. To put it simple, social Darwinism basically represents the idea that some individuals can make it and others cannot. Chicago and New York became a concrete jungle and a field of social Darwinism where people act like social animals rather based on their instincts than on moral principles. As no moral judgment is even given by the writers or by any other character about Carrie's behavior during the plot, one could moreover identify the cities as an environment which lacks morality. Okay, Alejandro.
And finally, we have the final theme, which is women and femininity. In the late 19th century in America, women, generally speaking, held way less economic, social, and political power than men. However, in this book, Carrie managed to have more wealth than any other man within the book. So it is for its time. It is an interesting novel to look for the role of women, which is in that time was not seen as a good thing. And next slide and final, I think. Yeah. And finally, we have the literary devices. The first one we have allusion, and it is said, and now poverty is threatening to seize her entirely and to remove this other world far upward like heaven, to which any Lazarus might extend appealingly his hands. The allusion here is a character from the Bible, a friend of Jesus who died and was resurrected, which is Lazarus. And then we have the simile. We have two. Carrie was unwise and therefore, like the sheep in its unwisdom, strong in feeling. And the author is comparing Carrie as a sheep because sheep were not that wise and they always followed the flock and the shepherd. And finally, we have a thought of the need that hung outside this fine restaurant like a hungry dog at her heels passing into her eyes. The author here is comparing Carrie like a hungry dog who is watching a restaurant as he was passing by. And I think there's no more slides. I think that's our presentation. I don't think we have time to discuss questions, but I think we have an idea that there's a lot of questions or topics that we can discuss that are interesting. For example, women, the role of women, ambition, morality, like Carla was saying. So that was our presentation. Hope you liked it. Any short comment? I don't know, Professor.
First of all, thanks for your presentation. Very thorough, and I would say it incorporates lots of elements that we need some time to digest. If you have not read the book, it might be a little bit overwhelming to receive tons of information, but it's good to make some connections with contemporary days and see if this story could be applicable or set up in nowadays. So I'm going to invite you to take notes of these questions. Carla, this question is for you. What do you think? I mean, I'm not expecting you to answer the question now because I know that we don't have enough time, right? But it would be a good idea that you could record this answer and maybe send it. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the question for you, Carla, is what do you think the author decided to include Hansen and Minnie in this story? Why do you think they are part of, I mean, okay, Minnie is Carrie's sister, but what do you think he decided to depict the characters in one way, right? Because Hansen and Minnie are very particular. They have very specific behavior preferences. And what do you think Dreiser decided to include them in the story and have that particular description? Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty. The second question is for Alejandro. Alejandro, at some point in your presentation, one of you mentioned that Theodore Dreiser was a practitioner of virtualism. I think Natalia mentioned, right? So virtualism, does it have anything to do with the fact that the character never gets punished in the story? Is there a connection? Can you associate these two concepts? The author being a practitioner of virtualism, and why does the character does not have any punishment in the end? Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And Natalia,
Yes.
okay. Considering the author's description of the character, do you think that he presents a biased depiction of Carrie so that we are influenced to judge Carrie in one way or the other? Do you think this is a feminist literary work, or in which way do you think we are allowed from the perspective of the author to judge Carrie in one way or the other? Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Alrighty. I think again. I think this is a very interesting story which depicts the American dream. There are many novels that develop the concept of the American dream throughout the entire American history, and this is one of them. That's why I want you to keep a very sharp eye on this literary work, which focuses on the American dream in one socio-historical period that is not the same as the one that we can think of at the very beginning of the history of this nation or country, in the arrival of the Puritans in the United States. So pay attention to the development of this concept, the American dream. I liked that they included the concepts of social Darwinism, which is part of the naturalistic period, in which the main concept is that we are as human beings are equipped, we are given certain tools, certain skills, and then some of us can make it through life better, and some of us cannot achieve certain self-imposed goals in life because we do not have the necessary, or we do not have what it takes to achieve that particular goal. So according to this perspective, we're not equal. Some of us have more skills than others. Therefore, the ones who are stronger, right, or more, the ones who are fitter than the rest, right, achieve something and climb up, right, the social ladder. So it was very, very interesting. the concept of social Darwinism can be seen in this particular work. Also in The Jungle, which is a book that was not analyzed in this semester, which depicted a society as a jungle. So in this jungle, it's like, it's a free-for-all environment, and you have to struggle, and you have to trust your instincts, and you're like an animal, a social animal, right? So it's interesting that from this perspective, we're not equal. And because we're not equal, we can achieve more or less from a social perspective. Okay, so I really appreciate the way you put these concepts very clear. And again, it's a book that has many layers that can, we think, what if the story could have been set now in contemporary days? Can we see this story taking place these days? You see, there are too many questions, too little time. And so feel free to develop more ideas in the forum that it's open. Remember that you need to post an original post and 2 this time, right? 2 replies, and that you need to interact with other students in connection to other literary works, okay?
Professor?
Okay. Any further comments? Ma'am, I'm listening.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, which is the deadline for us to send you these questions or recorded questions to you?
The sooner the better, considering that the
Okay.
run of questions, the run of questions is part of the book report. We don't have enough time to develop because we would take probably 20 to 30 minutes more. So the sooner the better, hopefully today.
Okay, and the second one is, which is the deadline, or which are the deadlines for Firm 3 and 4?
Are the deadlines not there?
No.
Okay. We are dealing now with realism, naturalism. So these literary periods are sort of the current topics, and therefore I think you have more time to develop the ideas for this period. I think that we're considering until the end day, the last day of June for posting for number 3.
Okay.
And I would say for number 3 and for number 4, because next week we're going to be finishing with the last presentation, which is an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. We're going to round up, right, in a session, all of the realistic and naturalistic literary works. And then we're moving towards the next one. So there's time's running, and therefore I guess June the 30th, the last day, this is a Tuesday, would be the last day for Forum 3 and 4.
Okay.
And I think we could consider number 4 to be the last one, even though we have another literary period, but I'm not sure about how much time you have in terms of your academic workload to post in the forum, to take your time to read other comments, and to take your time and reply. So I think probably in for number 4 is going to be the last one.
Yeah, please, because we are a little bit overwhelmed with the academic work,
Right.
So our thesis and so on.
Yeah, I totally understand. Yeah, so let's leave it there up to for number 4, if you're okay with that. If you change your mind, I'm open, flexible to making a different way, right? But if not, we leave it up to for number 4. Okay.
Okay, Professor. Thank you.
No, thank you. Any other comments or questions before we finish this session? I wish we could have a make a class on Monday. It would be really, really wonderful. And if we have a make a class on Monday, we could have the book report on an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I don't know if Camila or Diana are here, because I understand that they are the ones given this report. But
yes.
Okay, good. Because I couldn't open the Teams in my laptop, so I'm still working with a cell phone, which is totally fine, which because it makes me connect with my students. Some of my students, particularly in first year, are using cell phones to connect with the class and not computers. So it's a different perception. Camila, would you confirm if you're able to give your oral book report on Monday, maybe at 12?
Yeah, I think that.
Yes. I don't think we
Yeah.
have a problem.
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't know you were here. Sorry.
Okay, good. So I'm fine if we have 2 makeup hours. I think we already made up one last last Monday, so we would need only one more. So let's meet next Monday session at 12, from 12 to 1, for the last book report, the one on an occurrence. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that's the spirit. Okay, guys, I'll see you on Monday. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Professor. Bye.
Bye.
Super,
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye, everyone.